Okay, fantastic to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, Dr. Wellner. Dr. Sue, thank you very much, and Mr. Wellner, Julia's husband. Anyway, it's fantastic to be here tonight. I think the highlight of the evening was that apparently Photoshop picture of me. I don't have anything funnier the whole talk. So anyway, but I really appreciate being able to join you guys tonight. What I really want to do is say that I'm actually representing a piece of work that's really been done by dozens, if not hundreds, of geologists. Some are still colleagues at BP, and some have moved on, and then some are co-owners and partners. So these are just a few of the names that sort of worked together over the years, and but there are many, many more, and so that's just thanks to everybody who's helped. I also wanted to put a disclaimer. I love going to technical talks and seeing these like in 2-point font on the screen. Everything I say can be invalidated by it. So my disclaimer is not that, but what it is that I've worked probably half my career in the Gulf of Mexico and probably half out of it. So there's a lot of stuff that's happened in this sort of almost 30 years, because I did start my career almost 30 years ago when I was 12. And so anyway, this is our version, my version of how the Gulf of Mexico deepwater exploration through production story has played out. There are literally hundreds of thousands of other stories, and I encourage you to talk to people. They'll have different ways of characterizing things. They'll have been there, they'll think of it differently. But what I can tell you is it's a rich and entertaining basin, and I'll do my best to tell you sort of one view of how it's been evolving from an industry standpoint. And there'll be a lot of stories that I've missed too as we go across this sort of 25 or 28 years versus down into any deep stories. So what I want to start out with is the basin's been explored really since 1985 or so in anger as the area-wide OCS, federal government lease sales, came into play. And over 25 billion barrels has been discovered in the basin, in the deep water. And the way that we've characterized this, and this is some terminology that my colleague David Rainey came up with, but we talk about sort of 3 rounds of exploration, and that's the way we're going to characterize it. It's sort of the early exploration phase, there's a middle phase, kind of like the 3 bears, and then there's a phase that's playing out today, and also some other emerging ideas. And one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize is this basin, it's very special. It's not like every other basin in the world. It's very, very challenging, and technology and sort of the ability to challenge the status quo, challenge what we like to refer to as dogma, has been critical to actually industry and geoscientists and engineers being able to progress in the basin. So it's a very, very technology-driven play, and that's a lot of fun. So we'll refer to that. So here's the basin. One of the things, when you put the onshore U.S., the offshore U.S., shelf and deep water, Mexico, there's a little bit onshore, and then the Mexico deep water, which is sort of a shelf and deep water, still playing out. The basin is one of the most prolific basins in the world, with hundreds of billions of barrels discovered in it. We tend to focus on one part or another, but when you put it together, there's an absolutely world-class hydrocarbon province right here in our backyard. I mean, you're sitting on it. So it's amazing, and really what makes that happen is we've got a couple of really important factors. We've got some amazing reservoirs, both in the Mesozoic and the Tertiary. In the U.S., primary siliciclastic, but there are carbonate reservoirs, very prolific in Mexico, and hopefully sometime in the U.S. waters as well. Big differentiator, world-class source rocks, and of course the salt. So if we just look at a schematic for the basin itself would probably, it's actually a Permo-Triassic rifting started. That's really the inception of the basin as North America and Africa sort of started to rip away. We had a restricted basin, rift filled, all kinds of volcanics, all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. And the basin evolved and stayed restricted. And probably the first thing of note, if you're exploring in the basin, is we had a very evaporated basin, so a lot of salt deposited in the Jurassic. And I brought, and those of you who know me, I don't go anyplace without a salt. So if you want to come see it, it's really cool. And we'll talk a little bit more about salt, but there's just a hunk of Jurassic salt. So then as the basin sort of infilled but still stayed restricted, we have a series of source rocks. Probably the most prolific for where we're exploring is we characterize as latest Jurassic Tithonian, but there are other source rocks throughout the Cretaceous and actually into the Tertiary as well. And then we started to see a lot of carbonate deposition, sort of associated with that source interval. As we move into the Tertiary and kind of work our way up through the Pleistocene, we then start to see a series of siliciclastic reservoirs coming in what we call the Paleogene or lower Tertiary. We see a lot of sediment coming in from the ancestral Rockies, from sort of the middle of North America, coming in primarily in the western part of the basin. And then as we evolve, we get into sort of the proto-Mississippi and the Mississippi, more of an Appalachian-derived majority sediment source. And what those sediments did is they take our kind of boring, perhaps somewhat ubiquitous lump of salt, they load in, gravity does its wonders, and we end up with salt, especially in the deep water, working its way through the section. We bury it, and it goes from being a brittle to a ductile with heat and pressure, and it becomes the thing that makes the deep water Gulf of Mexico basin really so exciting and so challenging. We love the salt because it sets up a lot of the structures, and we hate the salt because it really messes with our geophysical imaging. So, and that's sort of the tension, and that's one of the exciting things about this basin. So, let's talk a little bit about the industry and how things have evolved. The shelf, which is basically everything from about 3 inches of water to maybe 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet. That's played out since really exploration started in the 1930s. And there's been over 40 billion barrels equivalent discovered in the shelf. And that clay, predominantly gas, or a lot of gas, sort of played out in the conventional sense, and there's probably a very little yet to find in that. Now there is a deep gas play. You probably heard about Macaran, Chevron made some discoveries there. It's kind of sitting and holding right now while the U.S. gas prices sort of, equilibrate or move back up because it's a costly play. But it's exciting, so there's probably still new life for the shelf to come. And we will see that. But right now, the more conventional sort of Miocene, Pliocene plays, pretty mature. What industry did, sort of stepping out in the 1980s, moved into the deep water Pliocene and upper Miocene. And there have been about 20 billion barrels discovered. This is where most of the production from the U.S. deep water actually takes place. And it comes from these Miocene, Pliocene plays, and a lot of that is from the upper Miocene, Pliocene. We've had about 20 billion barrels discovered. There's still a significant yet to find in this part of the basin, and there's still quite a bit yet to produce. But it's harder to find the big sort of standalones, the giants. There's a lot of infrastructure in this area, and so the smaller pools that sort of come as you work your way through the drill out of this play are very, very valuable because they can tie back to infrastructure. You don't actually have to create anything alone. And so then in evolving the lower tertiary or the deep water Paleogene, we'll talk a little bit more about this play. This is one where the industry is really kind of just getting started. It's particularly challenging in a number of ways. We'll talk about that. We have had about 5 billion barrels discovered, but there's a huge interpreted yet to find, maybe 15, 25 billion barrels recoverable yet to find out here. So big prize, but really hairy play. So, and then there's some really fun new plays, especially the Jurassic over in the in sort of the eastern central part of the Gulf of Mexico, where Shell and Nexen and other companies have been active. Probably, you know, maybe geographically limited in this area, but if the eastern Gulf of Mexico ever opens up, there will be a lot of fun trying to figure out what the plays are there in the Mesozoic. What has been happening, the U.S. has been producing about 20-25% of its hydrocarbon resources from the Gulf of Mexico since about 1970, maybe close to 2.5 million barrels per day. That was dominated by the shelf, which then went kerplunk. And so this is actually barrels produced per day. There's the 2.5 million. This is time. And so the early part of this decade, the shelf really started to go on to a really rapid decline. Fortunately, this Paleogene play was starting to pick up and is carrying a lot of the production from the deepwater. You see the impact of the drilling moratorium here as industry really was not able to sort of maintain production drilling and interventions. But the Miocene will continue to play out and perhaps build, hopefully followed by production from the emerging Paleogene and new plays as well. So we predict a long life for the basin, but it's going to continue to evolve as we look through different plays. I already talked you through the geology, but I'm going to use this cartoon to actually just sort of set a slightly bigger picture of the three sort of phases of exploration for the deepwater Gulf of Mexico that we're going to refer to. The first deepwater exploration, that sort of upper Miocene, Pliocene play, primarily extra salt. So on this schematic, the salt is the purple, the yellow are the reservoirs. If only it was that simple to find reservoir, it's not. But for the sake of our cartoon, it is. Here's the source rock behaving miraculously well, setting up and charging all these reservoirs. And so first we're going to talk about sort of first round of exploration here in the primarily extra super salt. We'll then move into slightly deeper sediments and deeper water as we talk about the second phase of exploration. And then we'll come in and we'll talk about sort of as we're going deeper and in getting into more complex imaging, kind of deeper water, but also moving back into shallower water that wells up to 35,000 feet deep, total depth. So this is the way the talk is actually going to be set up. And what we're going to do is just going to walk through like 28, 29 years of history very quickly. So let's talk about this sort of first phase of exploration. So again, Miocene, Pliocene. The play itself was primarily what we call top-down, so seismic attributes. And this was a play that a lot of people in industry dabbled in. We've been working in this sort of, I called it the shelf, but it's the flux trend. And we knew that attributes were pretty nice hydrocarbon indicators, usually once they're calibrated. And Shell, I think, along with other people in industry, took a big, bold move in sort of the early 80s. And they progressed a seismic attribute-driven play. And so the industry, Shell, Emeco, Exxon, made a really nice discovery at Ram Powell, and that kind of proved, wow, there is a play out in deep water, because there were all these sort of legends. There'll be no sand out past that counter-regional at the shelf slope break. How would you get sands out there in the deep water? There's no source rock. There's no nothing. You name it, it couldn't work out there. But I think industry got a taste of success with Ram Powell and some other things, and then Shell drilled a really wonderful basin opening well in Mars out here in Mississippi Canyon in about sort of 3,400 feet of water in 1988, 1989. And that really opened the play up. So what worked here? Well, there was a new play concept, tying the seismic attributes and actually starting to use 3D seismic to explore. We did a lot on 2D prior to that, but the industry started to bring 3D to bear, and that worked pretty well. We also had to push drilling capability out from sort of 1,000 feet to 3,000, 5,000 feet of water. And so in the sort of exploration and appraisal realm, hugely enabled by new thinking of geologic concepts, application of geophysics in new ways, and getting the drilling capability out there. A whole host of other technologies in the production realm with regard to spars and tension-like platforms and things like that, probably better suited to more engineering-oriented mind. And so this play, as we have seen it evolve, there have been about 10 billion barrels discovered to date, and it continues, people continue to make bright spot discoveries. It's usually not BP. We're not very good at the uncalibrated amplitude play, but other companies do it really, really well. Another thing did happen towards the end of this year. Mars, Ursa, a lot of discoveries out here in the deeper water in the Mississippi Canyon Protraction area. Some other key plays out in other parts of the basin. Then we got a little bit kind of, I don't know, there was a lot of shooting fish in a barrel type of talk. Some of you know what I'm talking about. This is pretty easy. Just map your bright spot, to heck with the trap, drill it. And industry got a little bit, I think, complacent, perhaps maybe a little bit arrogant about our ability to do that. And we kind of drilled as an industry 7 dry holes in a row. These were costly, expensive wells. Took a long time to play out. I think BP was the lead. And we were in 5 of those wells. And, sort of were our badge of shame. And a lot of people actually left the basin thinking, this is it. There's not much more to deliver here. And some companies stuck with it. And what we did at BP, and some of you have heard this story before, so I'll tell it really fast. We actually, instead of all being fired or walking away from our actually quite horrible acreage position, we had a lot of acreage, but it was all over these synclines with amplitudes in them. We were actually given sanction to go back and rethink from what we call the bottoms up, from the salt, from the source rock, and actually think about what this basin could deliver, and think about it geologically rather than, of course, we're dependent on geophysics, but rather than just geophysically. And for us and for a lot the other people who stayed and some new people who came in, sorry, I forgot I had this slide. These are just examples. Sorry about that. Told my boring story. These are examples of some of what the discoveries looked like. See amplitudes. It's really easy to see the hydrocarbons when they're calibrated. So here's an example of Ram Powell. Really neat, primarily stratigraphic trap with great attributes. Gas and oil. Mars, you see a series of bright spots. There is a structure to it, but you don't really see it that well on this line, and we didn't see that structure that well when we went around drilling synclines. And then here's an example of a quite late discovery, just to demonstrate that some of these attribute plays are still out there. But that's what they look like. And what you'll notice is there's no salt, they're between salt, or they're kind of on top of adjacent to salt. So, okay, forget that I told that story before. Now I'm telling you that whole story about the basin. And here it is, salt. So what we did, as several companies did as an industry, is instead of avoiding the salt or being afraid of the salt, we actually embraced the salt. And in our sort of bottoms-up look at structures, a lot of them are intimately intertwined with the salt. And what you're looking at is a seabed bathymetry map of salt. And if you can see these, the warm, some people can't differentiate the colors here, but some of these warmer colors, if you can see them, represent highs. And then what you're seeing are some of the lows here, basins, mini basins in the salt. And what we started to do is we started to go exploring under the salt and adjacent to the salt stems or salt roots. And that's actually what enabled what we describe as the second round of exploration in the deep water. So what are we doing now? We're actually looking, instead of running away from the salt, we're embracing it because the structures seem to be intimately tied. Here's an inversion structure created as salt withdrew and went into this salt diet here. And we also started to explore, as I said, from the bottoms up, looking at, there's the source rock, there's some deep sediments coming in, and we started to also look primarily for three-way and four-way dip-closed structures. So whereas the attributes, a lot of those were sort of, I'm not as worried about the trap, we became really, really concerned about the structural trap and how the hydrocarbons actually migrated into the trap. So how is the source rock interacting with the structure and what role is that playing? And what you can see, there was actually quite a cool well out here in Atwater Valley. Neptune found some pay, it's produced, but it kind of said, wait, there are sands out here. We hadn't really seen a lot of middle and lower Miocene sands, and that well sort of confirmed right there, just down dip of your heartland, there are some well-developed, what turned out to be sort of basin floor fan sands, and gave us hope that some of these structures out in the fold belt out here, and then behind the fold belt, and also back here in the lower slope, might actually have a charge. And so Neptune actually opened up the play for the fold belt in 1995. Atlantis followed, Mad Dog, Atlantis 98, Mad Dog sort of 99, 2000. You can see those on the map over here in Green Canyon. And then with Thunder Horse, again, the industry saw a play evolving in inversion structures in the sort of middle and lower slope. And so again, there's a combination of geologic know-how and technology that actually enabled the industry to progress in this play. So first of all, we talked about actually really being able to think through the first principles of geology. And when you do that, it makes perfectly good sense. But sort of our minds weren't really set up around that. We were playing geophysics in a basin that was just screaming for us to do some geology as well. And so that sort of thinking through how would a molecule act, what's happening here from the bottoms up, was a really big enabler for many companies involved in this play. 3D seismic, huge technology enabler. I mean, 3D, we moved from little postage stamps that were primarily used for development. As I said, Shell was doing these big 3D sort of in the Mars and Ursa area, and then industry took off with speculative 3Ds, big collaborative group shoots that not only did you get some really nice time products, but we learned how to attempt, because it's never perfect, to put that 3D back together in depth sections as well through a series of different depth algorithms, starting with Kirchhoff and working our way through some really advanced imaging techniques. And we needed that to actually position the structures and figure out where to put our wells. Drilling capability in the deeper water. Again, we're pushing the drilling rigs capacity out into 5, 6, 8,000 feet of water depth. And that was a really big task. The drilling contractors did a heroic job of doing this, but when we started to play back in here, getting rigs that could drill in the water depths that we had to the total depths that we required was really kind of daunting. We tried new builds, they didn't work, they'd go back to the rig shop. We had one well that took us about 2 years to get down just because the rig had to keep going away. And then you've been very bad rig, come back when you work, and it just never did. Another rig had to come back and complete that one. Thunder Horse into this, there were only 2 rigs in the world that could actually drill that well to the sort of close to 30 wells. It was more like 27,000 feet for the original well in about 5,600 feet of water. So huge strides on all sorts of technology. But it has played out. The play, as this one's been evolving, over 10 billion barrels discovered, and many of these fields are online and starting to produce and contribute to that U.S. sort of oil play. Most of what's been discovered here is actually oily, so in contrast to a lot of the shelf production. Okay, so we'll keep going. A couple of examples. Here's Atlantis. What you can see is you've got the salt overhang. So about half of Atlantis, this is a full thrust. About half of it's like super well imaged, and the other half, especially when we start exploring, was just crap. What's there? You know, but it's a beautiful structure and it's held up well. Thunderhorse we described. We've got a couple of different traps associated with that, all sort of salt withdrawal generated, and middle and lower Miocene reservoirs. This is the first time we've seen these lower Miocene reservoirs in the central Gulf of Mexico. And this is sort of not the saltiest view of Thunderhorse, but a lot of it, all of the three-way dip close structure and part of the four-way dip close are obscured by salt. So depth imaging was critical there. And then Mad Dog, another really nice fold structure that has just evolved, and it's a wonderful field that just keeps getting better and better. But the imaging there has been extremely tough, and we've used Mad Dog and Atlantis as both as the labs for advancing imaging technologies in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, so industry never rests, so 15 years on, what's next? Well, industry started to move into back into the deep water of the western Gulf of Mexico in actually a couple of different areas. BP and I think Conoco was out there. Some other companies were actually very active in leasing in the western Gulf of Mexico in the mid-90s. And we tried our darndest. We leased a lot on 2D, then 3D came out there. Almost all of our portfolio expired without drilling because we could not progress the imaging on conventional 3D. And so really not much came out of a round of licensing for about 10 years. But that at least got people interested. It got us sort of realizing just how complicated imaging could be with multiple salt bodies, rugose, top and base salt, and really thick, big contrast between these shallow super salt basins and really steep, almost massifs of salt, if you will. So industry has been leasing out there since forever, since 1985, but really a lot of leasing since in 1985. And we've seen a new play emerging out there. I guess it's not so new anymore. But this is, we call it the Paleogene. A lot of industry refers to it as lower tertiary. It's really the same play. And that's been evolving out in these older rocks in primarily the western Gulf of Mexico. There's been about 5 billion barrels recoverable in that. And there's, as I said earlier, a significant yet to find. We're still playing structures. Three-way and four-way dip close structures. There are really significant oil in place here. Some of the structures have 5-7 billion barrels of oil in place, but there's got to be a catch. The primary recoveries are really estimated to be quite low, sort of in the 8 to 12%. I love this play because it's so challenging, and I think that there'll be a big technology application to come, and industry is working on EOR technologies, drilling and completion technologies, to actually help us evolve this play. So let's look at sort of this third and maybe fourth round of exploration in the Gulf of Mexico. The play sort of, industry got hints of it from the Baja well out here in the Perdido Belt, Perdido Fault Belt. Sorry to make the map, but kudos to the companies that actually drilled that, I think in 1995, 93, 95. The structure itself really didn't work, but it proved a working hydrocarbon system and got into the sort of eyes of what could be. But in 2000, industry made a discovery over here at Great White, so that's Shell, Chevron, and BP. And then the same year, almost at the other end, sorry, it's quite hard to project from over here, industry made another discovery, Cascade. So kind of bracketed the play as we know it. We tried to drill this in Thunderhorse in 2000 as well. It didn't work out so well, so we've covered that part of the map up. It's over here. But you can see we've moved into the deepwater. And industry has been slowly progressing this play, starting with a number of discoveries over here in the Walker Ridge Protraction area. And as we gained confidence in the working petroleum system and started to understand the intimacies of what sort of structural traps might work and which ones won't work as well, we've progressed back over here and gone into the west. Really complicated salt, deeper depths, and we started to make discoveries in here that are a lot of hydrocarbons in place, kind of encouraging material volumes as well, if we can, even at 10% recovery. But a lot of these are coming in as something we would require high pressure production system to develop. So we have technology evolving, which is basically a drilling and production technology, all kind of called 20K trademark, for those of you who've seen that. But it's really about getting hydrocarbons out of this. So primarily the play has been structural traps, characterized by a lot of these plays, characterized by thick, complex salt, not all of them. You're getting into deeper water, so getting it sort of in the 5,000 to 9,000 feet of water. Higher pressures and temperatures for the western part of the play, not Great White, but these that are evolving over here. And deep, fine-grained reservoirs. So the reservoirs here have a higher lithic component than a lot of the sort of Mississippi and proto-Mississippi cratonic-derived sediments. You're seeing more coming in from the ancestral Rockies, and the rocks are just, I know we use this technical word, crappier. I mean, there's more living. So they're buried usually on average maybe 5,000 to 10,000 feet deeper than a lot of the Miocene rocks, and so the porosities are not as generous, and the permeabilities are really tough. To add to that, the oil is quite often, not all the time, a little bit, I'm not allowed to say viscous, I'm not even allowed to say heavy, it's a little bit thicker. So we're looking at sort of 1 to 20 centipoids oil. So it's more challenging to get out of the ground. Hopefully enabled a little bit by some of the higher pressures. Huge amounts of petroleum in place. Many of these projects over here, as a matter of fact, most of them are either producing, so Cascade, Chinook are producing. St. Malo and Jack should start producing within a year. Stones is sanctioned, Julia is sanctioned. So industry is getting after these. And so that's what we see is kind of coming. The play has a huge technology prize associated with it. And in imaging, as we continue to progress technology, seismic imaging technology, I put this slide in just to show how quickly new technologies can spread across this basin. So we've got some panels here that are one of our discoveries. Here's the top base salt seabeds up here. It's been cut off for your protection. But, and here's the structure, four-way dip closed structure. Here's probably a top Cretaceous down in here. And you can see the imaging improvements as we work our way through time. And this is one of our best imaged sort of Western Gulf prospects. And you can kind of see it here. As you put it into a proprietary depth migration, it's better. What industry did in sort of 2005, 2006, BP actually field trialed what we call wide azimuth towed streamer at our Mad Dog field. Well, this is such a cool industry. We're still collecting data from our field trial, and the contracting industries out there going like wildfire, covering the Gulf of Mexico with this wide azimuth towed streamer data. And you can see the imaging uplift. You're used to looking at imaging cross-sections, both in the spec data and then proprietary processing. The big uplift that's come from this very, very rich azimuth data that's been acquired, and then sort of really, really tender loving care seismic imaging. But that's not enough. We can't stop there because it's still really hard to image over here in the western Gulf of Mexico. So again, the contracting industry is getting really creative. They're bringing out this sort of very rich new acquisitions. Here's a coil, Western Deepness coil. There's some other very rich azimuth data sets that are being acquired by other leading contractors, CPG, PGS, sorry if I forgot anybody, but people are still out there innovating and creating new technologies, trying to crack this really complicated geologic challenge. So we talked a little bit about the imaging challenges associated with these new plays, recovery efficiency. This is not a Paleogene reservoir. They never look that beautiful quartzes, but you can see it's really the recovery of trying to get sort of stranded oil in a low perm rock out is going to be quite challenging. So huge sort of, in this third and maybe even fourth wave or round of exploration, we're going to have a lot of fun with water flood, other EOR, things that we can't even conceive of. And then, again, higher pressures, lots and lots of drilling and completion challenges, and there's no infrastructure really out in this western Gulf of Mexico with a few exceptions. So industry is trying to figure out, we're using FPSOs for the first time, thank you Petrobras, for bringing that technology into the Gulf. And we're actually trying to basically dynamically test these plays and see how well they will produce. But I'm very optimistic. There's some other cool plays. We didn't talk about sort of the basalt, Miocene, Pliocene, but Exxon, their partners, Anadarko and their partners at Hadrian and Lucius are bringing some exciting shallow plays to the Gulf of Mexico, which we desperately needed. They are still associated with salt, but kind of things that can be progressed in our lifetimes, or at least this decade, and development drilling is underway on those. And I do not know why Shiloh suddenly moved over here. It shouldn't be. It's actually over here with its buddy Appomattox. But there's, as I mentioned earlier, emerging Jurassic plays in the Gulf of Mexico as well. So where does that leave us? Use this slide to summarize, and we could spend, as some of my friends over here know, we could spend a long time talking about this slide. The colors actually represent sort of value chain. So this is everything from we had an idea, we accessed it, to we then matured a prospect, inventory, decided what to drill, drilled it, appraised it, sanctioned, developed, it got to first oil, and then produced. And so just picked a couple of examples of that to illustrate how long and how these different plays have been playing out and complementing each other. So let's look at sort of our basin opener, Mars, really with the discovery in 1988, 89, first oil 96, and it's been producing and still producing. It's just a fantastic facility. And there's a little, I didn't talk about mid-ocean challenges. That's a little year downtime due to hurricane damage to the Mars A platform. But this is a really fascinating slide because you just look at the years that it takes to go from idea to exploring to first oil. Same here, I've used an example. This could be Mad Dog, this could be Tahiti, any number of plays. In this second round, as we started, these were the super salt and in between the salt plays that we talked about. Here we moved into deeper water, deeper reservoirs, and instead of running from the salt, we've embraced the salt, which has created all kinds of imaging challenges for us and a little bit more uncertainty. But again, these sort of ideas to first well, taking about 10 years to play out. You go from there to production, another sort of 7, 8 years, and fields are still in there from this round, still in their infancy, sort of only maybe 20, 25% of the production actually met today, and still a lot more to come. And as we continue to progress, we've got the emerging Paleogene clay with a wide range. I think that's probably going to be round 3 and round 4 of the Gulf of Mexico. So moving into the Western GoM, a lot of deeper reservoirs, a lot of challenging imaging for the most part. And again, it's going to take us a while to figure out how to make these projects economic, how to develop them when they do have sort of such a low initial recovery factor, and we're not sure yet how aquifer or water injection is really going to affect those. But I kind of want to say, that's about 25 years of exploration. We've continued to throw technology at it, and we've really matured some fantastic geophysics. We've moved into deeper water, higher pressure, and just continue to learn from this basin and challenge dogma. What I kind of like to leave you with is this is one of the most complicated basins that the industry has been successful in. A lot of basins you'd go in and within sort of 5 or 6 years you've drilled out your prospect inventory. We're still kind of 25 years in the deep water, still making giant field discoveries. So it's pretty amazing, and there's a lot more yet to come. So we've talked about the different rounds, how they've evolved, and how technology has enabled them. And I would say, to work in this basin, you have to be creative. You have to be willing to challenge dogmatic thinking. The number of times we've heard that will never work. I mean, I wish I had sort of a little gold star for that, and probably the number of times I've said it too. But people are continuing to challenge, push the envelopes for both technology and for sort of human capital in the play, and we continue to unlock more prizes in the basin. And I think there's still more to come. So keep looking for it. With that, I'd like to end the talk. I'd like to say thank you to U of H for hosting us, and it's a great honor to have Dr. Sheriff and Mrs. Sheriff here tonight. Got all your books. And thanks again for letting us talk about basin.
As a token of you tonight for this keynote speaker, here's a plaque for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.